Hello, Talofa. Welcome to the OUM community. Welcome to Meet the Dean and Meet the Associate Dean of Australia and Aotearoa, New Zealand. We're so glad you're here. A special welcome to those of you joining us live. So hi to Daniel and Eddie, Kirby and Michelle. Hi to Nordia and Shannon, Talia, Jana, Sally. And hi, Keisha. And hi, Nilly. I'm starting to see some of our incoming 24-1 cohort students and some others from this year's MedSci. So welcome those of you who are new students, and welcome to those of you who are prospective students, and welcome also to those of you who are joining us via recording. I'm so pleased that you could all join us, and also to have Professor Paddy Dewan, the Dean of Australia and Aotearoa, New Zealand, and Dr. David Mountford, the Associate Dean of Australia and Aotearoa, New Zealand, joining us today. So thank you so much both for being here. I really appreciate the time, and for you to both come and be able to meet some of the members, new members of our community and prospective members of our community. So thank you so much for being here. So Dr. David, would you tell us a little bit about where you're from and why you decided to become a doctor?
I'm Brisbane born and bred. I've lived here all my life, except for when I did my rural placements for nearly 4 years. I was never going to be a doctor. I'm a twin, and my brother and I were always going to be plumbers like our father was. Okay. And then, you know, right towards the end of the senior year at high school, my father said, look, I don't want you to be plumbers. I want you to do something else. Do whatever you want to do. He was unfortunately found to have a bicuspid aortic valve and to be in quite profound heart failure when he was 42 years old. One day I used to take my mother up to the hospital every night, and somebody left a stethoscope hanging over a hospital bed. And just for fun, I plugged the stethoscope in and popped it on his chest and had an epiphany. And I just had to be a doctor. That's all there was to it.
I'm so glad I asked you that. I did not know any of that. I didn't know you were destined to be a plumber before. A stethoscope found you by destiny. So thanks so much for sharing that. Yeah. Professor Paddy, what about you? Tell us where you're from and why you decided to become a doctor.
I grew up in country Victoria in a place called Wangaratta as the son of a bicycle shop owner. So learning to tinker, I've since become a plumber, David. I'm a paediatric urologist. But why did I head in that path? I grew up in a farming community and really enjoyed being around animals, and being a vet was what I thought I wanted to do. But somebody said to me one day, why don't you do medicine? And I didn't have an answer. And then found that perhaps that was a reasonable calling, and ended up doing medicine instead of veterinary science, and have now working with children. So I'm a kind of plumber as a paediatric urologist. I'm a kind of vet because I work with children, where you can't really talk to your patients, but like vets, they kind of talk to the animals, and I think I can talk to the children in a way that communicates beyond words. So I've become a plumber and a vet, I guess, after all.
And a tinkerer.
Yes. A bicycle shop is a very good place to learn to be a surgeon, I can tell you.
Oh, say a little bit more about that. Why do you do that?
And also, coming from a farming background, I'd have to say, those who work in industries like fixing bicycles, those who work on farms, they often have a problem that they haven't seen before, that they don't necessarily have the specialist tools, and you have to come up with a solution. And that is a lot of what good medicine is about, and particularly surgery. Every surgery you do is a little bit different. So every surgery is not kind of anarchy, but it's a reinvention every time, because no patient is the same, no problem is the same. So it's almost a new invention each time you do it, based on sound principles, based on good science, and based on the artful application of that science.
I would never have thought of that, but I think it like really illustrates this principle that we're trying to instill in students about seeing things as a doctor. Like you would not just think about that unless you had the mind of a doctor to be able to apply that. So thanks for sharing that, Professor Paddy. So both of you went to medical school. Both of you went to medical school in Australia, as I understand. So can you tell us a little bit about, what you liked best or what was most challenging in medical school for you? So Professor Paddy, we'll start with you. What did you find most challenging about being in medical school?
I think the breadth of the knowledge that you needed to learn in areas that were very unfamiliar. But I guess the joy of gaining that knowledge and being able to dig deeply into that knowledge, but noting that there were times that you couldn't really dig as deep as you wanted to because you had to cover the other areas as well. Another challenge, I think, for all of us when there's been disconnection from your usual social set. So from growing up in the country town to coming down to the big city, that was a bit of a challenge, but an enjoyable, this is different, why not take on a challenge? And I think that's the case for those who are in our university, that there are those sorts of challenges, but nothing too threatening, but lots of challenges that were enjoyable to overcome.
Well, just because you've touched upon it, what do you think is most challenging for OUM students that might have been different from your experience in medical school?
I think having had a career that you need to perhaps continue to gain some financial support from to be able to then complete your course, and getting that balance between gaining the knowledge that you need to get to be the best doctor you will ever meet, and which you should all aspire to, but also knowing that you've got to support yourself through that university career. I see that really as a pain point for people. So therefore setting yourself up as soon as you can to be able to make the time that you need for the study as available as possible, so because you've got your finances in order to see that they don't impose upon your enjoyment of the study process.
And we do have some students, some current students who have joined us today that would probably echo that about the challenge of the depth and breadth, and then also setting yourself up for success and making sure that you have a sufficient amount of time to devote to your studies. So thanks for mentioning that. What about you, Dr. David? What would you say was the most challenging aspect of medical school for you?
I think settling in, number one, sort of thinking, what am I doing here? All these people are brighter than I am. Just the anxiety of starting off. I found the preclinical years difficult. In some instances, I found studying anatomy to be harrowing. It just wouldn't stick in my brain. I was fortunate compared to OUM students these days that the employment that I found when I was a young doctor, there was no KFC or Macca's around then. So you had to, really look for work. And my work generally was done during holidays, and I worked for the Army as a cook assistant. That basically meant you got up at 4 o'clock in the morning, you lit all the fires, and then you spent the rest of the day washing dishes and chopping wood. And the thing was, because they were such long days, they paid very well, so I was able to save money from that and then just continue my studies without having to do work. But the clinical years were just magnificent, absolutely wonderful. It was, that's when you say to yourself, boy, I'm on the right track here. This is what I really want to do. It was great. So, for our students, I'd say, the preclinical course is going to be difficult. It's been rewritten. The new course is simply wonderful. It's simply wonderful. So you will all be introduced to some clinical aspects of medicine right from the beginning. So it's not going to be pure science. It's going to be related to human beings and the care of human beings. So I think when I read those courses, I thought that, they're exciting, they're adventurous, they're really, really going to be well worthwhile studying.
I'm glad that you think so. I loved our preclinical curriculum and I love teaching in it. So I'm glad that it rings out well for our clinical faculty as well. And I think I just wanted to mention, we do have a faculty member that has a really popular talk that goes, work hard, and then it goes, work even harder. And this is the secret to success in medical school. And I think you typified that in your medical school experience. You weren't taking a break. You were going off and working in the military at 4 o'clock in the morning in order to get through medical school. And I think it takes that level of commitment and dedication for many of our students as well. So thanks for sharing that experience. Do you have any advice, or what do you think that prospective students, Dr. David, that are in Australia and Aotearoa, New Zealand, what should they consider before they apply to medical school?
First of all, it's time intensive and study intensive, especially in the preclinical years. If you don't come in with an attitude of saying, right, I'm going to set myself a schedule, I'm going to stick by it, I'm going to put my best self forward into doing this work. Preclinical work is so important. If you don't do that well, you don't do as well in clinical medicine because your knowledge base isn't there enough. I feel what probably not the person to talk about as far as balancing life and income and studies, because I was actually able to partition mine. So I understand with students coming through, this balance of being an adult who's studying medicine and being an adult who has to fiscally make sure that they've got everything under control, is probably going to be one of the biggest sort of difficulties of change. But
sometimes you don't even know until you're in it, all of the things that you need to do. Yeah.
The other thing that I'd like to bring up at this point would be OUM has massive support for students. You should never feel alone. There's always somebody who's there to help you. And we do have the 24-hour hotline. So if you're studying at 11 o'clock at night and you can't understand a concept or something like that, you can put it into the help desk and within 24 hours you'll have an answer. And that'll be from one expert in the faculty who knows what's going on. So you should never feel alone. And that should go for what you're studying, dealing with IT, dealing with psychosocial problems that might pop up in your family life, and dealing with finances. There's people available to be able to help you any time of day through your course.
I'm actually going to take a moment to build on that a little bit because I'm so passionate about our student support programs. And I love that we're a small university and we get to know, right now we have 313 students. We're about to have 353, and you get to know all 353 students. And in addition to our advising services and our IT support, we also have peer supporters who are available in every state in Australia to help students who may be struggling with mental health or wellness issues. We have our OUM Student Association, the OUMSA, that's there to be a voice for advocacy for students. For all of our new students who are coming in January or July, we also have our student ambassadors that are there as you transition from being a prospective student to being a matriculant, to being a new student, to starting your organ systems in med-sci. So we're really, really serious about ensuring that students have good support, good attention from both our faculty and staff, as well as student and peer mentors, so that they can be successful as they start their studies and as they continue their studies. So I just couldn't resist saying a little bit more about that. So thank you for saying that, Dr. David. Professor Paddy, what do you think? What should prospective students who are here today or who are watching the Meet the Dean and Associate Dean via recording, what do you think that they should consider before they apply to medical school?
I think one of the things is to be excited about the preclinical years, is not the sense of burden of having to know a lot of stuff that, well, how's that going to help me treat a patient? Because I think both Dave and I have had that experience as medical students where you think, what am I doing here? In fact, I was so distracted by that sense of, oh, God, I'm not enjoying this study. It's, I'm learning all these facts and I don't know how it's going to apply to me being a doctor. I actually took a year out to do a Bachelor of Medical Science, which then connected me to patients in doing a research year in psychiatry. And fortunately, that was the trigger for me to become very excited about the course. And obviously after that, as for David, connecting to patients in the clinical years was fine. But if I can encourage students to be excited about those preclinical years, and give an example of a boy I've seen today. So as a paediatric urologist, I've seen a boy who's had infection in his testicle. And if you know the embryology, you know that he might have a duplex kidney with the upper pole of the kidney connected to the vas, causing him to have infection in the testicle. So if you don't have that real grounding of knowledge, you'll have a kid who'll come in and you'll see them and you won't know all the possible diagnoses, because in order to be able to do that, you have to know the embryology to be able to do my specialty properly. And there's lots of other specialties that require you to have a really deep knowledge of those other foundation things that you'll be doing. So you will learn a lot more from your preclinical years by being excited about the potential links that you will then put in place into the future. And therefore, it won't be as hard for you to spend all that time, because you'll be excited about the eventual clinical links that you'll be establishing.
I think it's I would say it's more common than not for our preclinical students to say, like, I just don't know, like, is this really for me? When they're in the preclinicals, like, is this going to make a difference to how I treat patients? And for people to question that, I think is very normal amongst our students. So at least in the 313 students that I know and have talked to, it's very normal for them to question that. But I think it's that knowledge that really sets doctors apart from other people in health professions, that they just don't have that really deep understanding of how the kidney and testicles develop during embryonic and fetal development that would lead them to be able to diagnose a condition like that correctly, where an individual that didn't have that training wouldn't. So we try to encourage our students always to be thinking about the application of this to clinical scenarios, even though they don't yet have, the face-to-face patient interactions until a bit later. We're still trying to ensure that they have some exposure to clinical topics and clinical scenarios at the beginning, but very, very common amongst our students to feel that way as well.
I'll just come in here and
please.
At the last university-wide meeting, Taffy Gould sort of suggested to all our students that they consider themselves doctors from day one. Okay. There's this educational idea that floats around that says in the preclinical years you study so you can pass exams, whereas in the clinical years you learn things because they may be of benefit to a patient in the future. And I think if, like Paddy said, you have that sense of excitement, and going along with what Taffy said, by thinking, I'm going to be a doctor, it will make learning in those preclinical years much more exciting.
I agree. Thanks for bringing that forward. So we do have some attendees today who are even a little bit further on their journey. They're going to be starting in January. They're part of our next incoming class. So welcome 24-1 cohort who are here today. And they have approximately 5 weeks before they start. They'll start with orientation and then they'll go into general principles, which is a preparatory course for our preclinical medical science organ systems like pulmonary system and cardiovascular, et cetera. So knowing that they have about 5 weeks before they begin the program, Professor Paddy, do you have any advice for them about what they could be doing over the next 5 weeks?
Having a break over Christmas, but as David was saying, just be a doctor in your mind. Be heading in that sense of taking responsibility for your own actions and taking responsibility for the healthcare of people. And every time you walk around, there's an amazing number of diagnoses you can make walking through a crowd, for instance, and learn to observe and practice the art of listening to body language, giving reflective body language, and read as much as you can widely on the subject of medicine and communication. Consider that you're going to be an individual who's going to be caring for your patients. So perhaps practice being a little more caring to those who you know now.
Very good advice. What about you, Dr. David? Do you have any advice for what our 24-1 cohort could be doing over the next 5 weeks?
Well, I think while you're putting your feet up over Christmas and enjoying yourself and enjoying family and things like that, it wouldn't hurt to buy 2 paperback books from Amazon. One of them is called Every Patient Tells a Story, and it's by Lisa. I've forgotten her name there. It's available on Amazon, and it is an interesting book because it gives you an insight into how working doctors actually work. The important thing about the writer of this book is a well-known American clinician. She's a very good diagnostician, and she wrote all of the medical components of the Dr. House series that was on television during the 1990s. The important thing about that, for those who've seen Dr. House, is that the writer actually wanted to show the worst possible doctor you could possibly have. And, you know, Dr. House's often said statement of you can't trust patients, they lie all the time, was just so wrong. And everything he did was wrong. And a lot of people looked at it and say, boy, he's an intelligent, bright doctor. He was just a terrible doctor. So that book is worthwhile reading. There's another one called How Doctors Think. Again, available on Amazon. 2 little paperbacks. You'll get through them within a couple of days each, but they may help kindle that little fire inside of you that, yes, I want to be part of this sort of team. Now, this is the sort of thing that I want to do, to look after patients.
Our admissions counselors have put together kind of a pre-reading list, so I'll make sure that those 2 books are added onto it.
Thanks.
And for those of you who are in our 24-1 cohort, you do have access to the orientation classroom, so you can pull that reading list if you'd like, and I'll have those 2 books added to it just in case you missed the titles from Dr. David. So this is something we touched upon, but because we do have some attendees today who have already started the med sciences preclinical curriculum, they just completed either cardiovascular or pulmonary systems. So shout out and congrats to all of you who finished your cardiovascular, your pulmonary system. And they will all be taking endocrine system with me in January. So, you know, as deans and associate deans and as clinicians, why do you think it's important for our preclinical medical students to really dive deeply into preclinical medical sciences before working with patients as a clinical student? So I'm going to ask you first, Professor Paddy.
Well, I think it's like anything that you're building on, you always start with the foundation and the frame. And so I think that's the same for the preclinical really is the foundation and the frame on which you build your clinical knowledge to add the finesse of the clinical skills that you subsequently learn through the clinical skills course and through the connection that you have through maybe your own career initially. But certainly if you don't have the foundation and you don't have the framework, then the built product of your medical career is not going to stand the test of time. You're going to have circumstances where you're encountering patients and you're making wrong decisions because you're basing those interactions and decision making on too little information. And that's why people that are not connecting to the patient is a significant problem, but not connecting with sufficient knowledge to then be able to grapple with the problem is that the solution to that comes from focusing on the foundation, the frame that comes from the preclinical years.
Thanks, Professor Paddy. What about you, Dr. David? Why do you think preclinical students need to dive really deeply into preclinical medical sciences before they see patients in clinical years?
I agree with Paddy. You can't build anything out without foundations and frames. You really definitely need them. I can say from taking students when the clinical course starts, things like that, the ones who've got a really firm bedrock of preclinical knowledge make the transitions much easier than those who don't, because they just, a problem will present itself and they simply don't know where to go with it. Whereas if they applied themselves to their preclinical learning and built that steady base, that strong base and the scaffolding and the framework they have, it's much easier for them. And let's face it, a lot of the stuff that you're going to learn in preclinical is exciting stuff. People coming into medicine these days are going to confront a vastly different future compared to what Paddy and I have been through so far. It's going to be extremely exciting.
I think so. I do want to talk a little bit about clinicals, and this tends to be something that our webinar attendees really want to dive into as well. So if you're here attending live and you have any questions about this section or about anything we've talked about so far for Dr. David and Professor Paddy, we're happy to take questions. If you would type your question into the Q&A box, and then we'll select some to answer live. So you can please go ahead and use the Q&A if you do have questions for Dr. David and Professor Paddy. So at OUM, the preclinical course, the first half of medical school, is taught in a series of live Zoom sessions, as well as recorded lectures. We have online textbooks. We have students who meet in study groups live or online, in person, a mix of that. Whereas in clinicals, the students are going and doing their clinical rotations live. But to ensure that our students are prepared for clinical rotations, OUM has a clinical skills course, which both Dr. David and Professor Paddy are very familiar with, both the content of the course and its development. It also has some live and some asynchronous components that students complete before they do their clinical rotations, and it gets expanded and improved over time. So although that course might be slightly different in the future for students who may be starting in January, or for those who are prospective students now. Dr. David, what do you think our prospective students and current students should know about our clinical skills course?
First of all, it's a change. It brings about a huge change in you. What you wanted to do medicine for, and you work through your preclinical years for, finally arrives in your lap. The trouble is you come along with an attitude that every doctor spot diagnoses without understanding that it takes a lot of time for us to experience so much to be able to make diagnoses easier. And as third-year medical students coming into the clinical skills course, we don't want you to approach clinical medicine that way. We want you to think about it, that there are logical sequences. It's about data gathering, data analysis. It's about synthesizing things, using critical judgment, and reflecting on what you're doing. So it's a very different sort of way of learning compared to the preclinical years. We do a 5-day workshop to start off with, and they're 5 heavy days of work. But every cohort we've been through so far have thoroughly enjoyed it and found it, quite exciting. And the thing that I hear most is, this is what we really need now. This is wonderful. So it's very rewarding for both Paddy and I to be involved with the clinical skills course. So basically, if you have to say, what is a clinical skills course about? It's taking you and teaching you how doctors think, how to be a doctor, and the ethical, probably, and professional aspects of being a doctor. A lot of people come in who've practiced nursing for quite a while. Paramedics come in, things like that. What you have to understand is that you are now training as doctors, and so a lot of the stuff that you learnt from the past may be quite different to what we teach now. And so when people come into the clinical skills course and into their clinical rotations, it's really important for them to be able to take that past knowledge that they've got, use some of it, but park the rest, okay? You are not now longer required to think like a doctor, like a nurse or a paramedic. You're required to think like a doctor. And that's the primary process of the clinical skills course.
Thanks, Dr. David. Professor Paddy, would you say that this is an essential course before students start their clinical rotations?
Yeah, absolutely. And can I just take my hat off to David and Janet Clarkson for the work they've done in bringing the clinical skills course from one that was of assistance to students to one that catapults them into a fine start into their clinical rotation. So it really is now a course that takes you from knowing the basic knowledge, so building that foundation and the framework, to then starting to put some of the cladding on. So having a feel, so the further education in doing the hands-on suturing type approach, that really gearing you up to be the intern before you get there is the approach. So that as you go into your clinical years, it's a transition to your internship. It's not simply being a medical student who is learning to have contact with patients. It's really the vision through to where you're going to be the person responsible for that junior clinician role is really what the clinical skills course sets you up to be able to do.
Thanks, Professor Paddy. There's another person who wanted to give a compliment to Dr. David in our Q&A, so I'm just going to read that out. Shannon was saying, a statement to say thank you to Dr. Mountford. He was my grandmother's GP and the entire reason I work in healthcare. It's so lovely to see you again. So there we go.
Very much.
Okay, so Professor Paddy, I want to ask you about clinical rotations, which students would start after they complete the clinical skills course. Can you give some examples of clinical rotations that OUM students would complete in Australia?
Yeah, very different and varied according to what is the subspecialty that is being, or the specialty and the subspecialty that are being taken on. So there are 72 weeks of rotations and 16 weeks are electives, and they are, we gain access to various institutions through various mechanisms, and there's a body of work being done at the moment to ensure that those paths are smoothed even further into the future. So the process is that when you're looking for your internal medicine, for instance, in the different states in New Zealand, there are some institutions that we have connections with, like the Epworth Hospital in Melbourne, where they take 2 of our students per year. And there is a fee for the time that you spend there, and they manage the program as you come into it. If you're in Western Australia, then Peel Health puts our students through most of the rotations there. And in South Australia, we have excellent access to a wide range of rotations if you choose to go there. And again, there are some fees involved, and there is a process of connection. For those rotations that we have available, the core course specialists also assist. So Ravi Kumar in Victoria, for instance, is involved in very much coordinating the internal medicine rotations here, and connection with the specialists who are involved, but also with the clinical rotations team in Brisbane, Heather Moore and Anne Candy. They help to coordinate. In terms of finding the rotations, where I see in the Q&A, there's a question about if you know somewhere where you might go, how do you connect to that previous non-provider? Well, we need to do our due diligence to check that they have the qualifications to be involved in teaching you. We need to make sure that we do our checks and balances there. But there's always the opportunity for you to connect with somebody who you might be able to have your rotation. It's often community medicine is the rotation that people want to be involved with somebody that they know, and maybe they're their mentor as well. That can be opened up, but it very much has to be done as part of a partnership with the system within OUM. And the problems we have, the people going off and negotiating, even with hospital managers, where we actually have a relationship at a corporate level with that organisation, that creates a problem that often shuts the door on our students and even the student who thought they would be able to go in that direction. So be careful that if you have an idea of where you might want to go that we have not been associated with before, then we encourage you to help develop that link. But if you go off by yourself without incorporating us, then it's likely that you're going to shoot that opportunity in the foot, so to speak, because there are other things that you won't be aware of that we need to take into account. So let's work together and open up as many opportunities as we can. And if I could also talk about the electives, be excited about what electives you might want to do, and be excited to reach out and get a range of different opportunities. If you enjoy a core in community medicine, is one of the common things we see, that people will go and do their community medicine, they enjoy the time, and then they want to go back and do an elective there as well. Encourage them not to take that choice. Go and find something else that might excite you that you didn't realise maybe you had an interest in, because most of medicine is pretty exciting. So take the opportunity of learning in many different directions, so you can then come out the end of your rotations as a well-rounded person with some involvement in your interest, but an opportunity to really spread your knowledge beyond what you might initially be interested in.
Could you explain the difference between a core and an elective rotation?
Yeah, so there are different things about. So a core is what you have to do. At the end of that core rotation, you have an exam, and through that rotation, you have quizzes that you need to do, which are formative, and then you have the summative exam at the end of that, and you have to pass that exam. While you're doing that core, you also have to get a report from your supervisor, and in order to be able to pass the rotation, you have to have a pass mark on that supervisor's report as well. In addition, you have to trigger that report, you have to have a logbook, and that logbook has to be of a sufficient standard to reflect that you've seen the material, and it has to be well recorded. It's not actually marked, but it has to be submitted. What is marked, though, are the case studies, and you have to do a case study for each 2 weeks within that core rotation. So within each of those courses. So there's surgery, medicine, obstetrics and gynecology, paediatrics, emergency medicine, the rotations, and then the electives. There's a different expectation of what comes at the end. So the case studies are not necessary. You need to do a logbook, and the mark that you get is based on the supervisor's report. So there's very different assessment of them, and the purpose is to give you the opportunity of reaching out beyond those things we feel you have to know to those things you might want to learn as well. But noting that coming into a Samoan university, there is no wriggle room for the consideration of you having to go and spend 4 weeks in Samoa, which is not an imposition. It's an absolutely exciting opportunity for you to be able to go to a brilliant place to learn medicine.
Students like rave about their Samoa rotations and what they're able to be exposed to, and what they're able to do on those rotations that they wouldn't otherwise have access to doing. So it's really a great opportunity for our students, and all of our students, whether they're in Australia or New Zealand, like many of you today, as well as the students that we have in Canada and the US and in Samoa as well, complete those rotations or complete a rotation in Samoa. There's one other question for you. Oh, please go ahead. Please.
Just something else about rotations, which is it's kind of slipped through the keeper a little bit in recent times. In the student handbook, it suggests that 2 weeks off between rotations. So you can do your rotations, you can divide into segments. So for instance, for those who might wish to come to Melbourne, you can do 2 weeks of paediatrics and 2 weeks of surgery in my clinic. So that would be considered a segment of a rotation. So for the surgical rotation, there's a 10-week rotation, so that you then do the other segment somewhere else. So you don't have to do the Moodle exam until you've finished your rotation, and your segments might be spread over quite some time. But if you do a 10-week rotation, really strongly encourage you to take a 2-week break rather than try and run too hard and trip along the way. Take that time out between your rotations so you can get your Moodle exam done. You can get your case studies finalised. You can organise the paperwork in relationship to your supervisor's report. And that's one of the significant problems students have had. Struggling with finances is one thing that we help with, but trying to encourage you to take that time off. Don't trip and fall and have to take a leave of absence because you haven't taken the breaks between your rotations. But remember that there are leave of absences that you can take, and if things get too hard, then you can take a year off and come back refreshed and renewed. So it's not a race. It's a slow march to get where you want to, where sometimes that can happen really quickly. But don't force yourself too hard so that you trip and fall, because we want everybody to be successful in this course.
Pace yourselves.
Yeah.
There is a question in the chat. Is there enough clinical rotations for all OUM students, or do we need to find our own in Australia? No preferred state. So Professor Paddy, would you answer that one?
Yeah, we're still in a situation where finding rotations that might be what you really want to do. So we have rotations in medicine in Victoria that have quite a geriatric focus. So if there's something in medicine, if you would want a more endocrine focus, for instance, then if you have an endocrinologist that you have a connection to, that we can open up that opportunity, then that would be something that we would encourage you. So we're encouraging students all the time to help us build the faculty through your connections, because many of you have clinical connections. So we are growing as a university. We want to grow the faculty even quicker, and therefore, and we respect your connection to the healthcare professionals around Australia and New Zealand. So very much we appreciate your participation, but it needs to be as part of the team and not shooting any situation in the foot because you've reached out well beyond where we know you should go, because we've had the experience of connecting with corporates and with other organisations. So yes, please bring new faculty to us through those connections, but let us be informed of that and do the work on your behalf.
Thanks, Professor Paddy. I want to talk a little bit about the OSCE because it's my favorite exam at OUM. So before students complete their MD degree, they take a final clinical exam and the OSCE, which is, well, I'm just going to say the OSCE. So Dr. David, can you tell us what the OSCE is and why it's important?
Yes, thanks. The OSCE is a very, very important exam format that was developed in the 1990s, in some places a bit earlier than the 1990s. And it's now been basically established worldwide. What the OSCE stands for is objective, structured, clinical examination. So basically, if you come to do your OSCE, so we've got 10 people doing an OSCE, and they have one case. Every time a different individual does the case is exactly the same as the one as they've given to the student before. So it's made objective, and that's why it's structured, okay, so that every student gets exactly the same amount of information in the test as every other student. The actors who play our patients have a script that they have to stick by, and they do. So that way we know we're treating everybody the same. Our OSCEs are built around being as difficult as the AMC2. That's the level we strive to attain. Basically, it's a 10-minute station. You have 2 minutes to read the case on, sitting outside a room. You get 2 minutes to read a case that's stuck to the door, and then you get 8 minutes to go inside with a patient and an examiner usually, and you have to run the case. You have to find out what's wrong with the patient, or give them advice about how to manage a problem, or describe things like asthma management plans, things like that. So it's all very, very clinical. And in order to make sure people are ready for it, we run a thing called the OSCE preparation course. It's on every Monday night, virtually, of the year. It's free, and we get students to come along, especially if they're about to do their OSCEs. So if they're 8 or 9 weeks out from their OSCEs, that's a perfect time to come into OSCE prep. I'm noticing now a lot of the students who do the clinical skills course come along to the OSCEs and they just sit there and listen. Okay. The most important, we teach 2 things. Number one, exam technique, how to do it. Okay. And then the other one is we really, really, really insist on high quality clinical skills being used. And so we teach how that's done. The process is that a student will volunteer to take a case. They'll then be given the case. They then think aloud for the 2 minutes, telling everybody else what their thoughts are, and then they get 8 minutes to do the case, usually with me as a patient. The best part about that is it's, you're really put in the spot. You're anxious. You feel concerned and worried. The first time you do it is terrible. But by doing it, being in that hot seat and having to go through and do it again, become disciplined with your clinical thinking, you can see this massive change takes place in students as they go through the 8 weeks. And now when we do the OSCEs, it's very common to see a very high pass mark in the OSCEs. So I think the clinical preparation course is doing well. And from the very early days that I was involved with OUM, where we would fail 7 out of 10 people doing the OSCE, it's now gone the reverse. So we're passing 8 out of 10. Sometimes we get 10 out of 10. So it's enjoyable part of course to be in. Everybody has a bit of fun, but we always learn a lot. So that's the story of the OSCEs.
I think that all students talk about the value that they get out of the OSCE prep course. And I think one of the big things of that course is something that Professor Paddy mentioned earlier, which is about communicating like a doctor, that being part of the preparatory course basically pulls away all the butterflies and all the nervousness about finally being on the spot and communicating like a doctor. That really allows the students, when they come into the exam, to have that confidence that they can act like a doctor, that they can communicate like a doctor when they come to that exam. So at least that's what I hear from students anyway.
If I could just follow up on that too,
Please,
Nicolette.
please.
In terms of getting ready for the exam, there's it's a bit like being involved in a theatrical production in some way. You've got to rehearse. Yeah, you've got to rehearse your lines. You've got to learn your lines, but you then have to develop the confidence and communication, and a lot of that is about using fantasy to put yourself in that comfort zone too. So if you've through that sense of using fantasy, you've put yourself in that scenario where you're able to deal with all the eventualities, which I do as a surgeon. Before I do an operation, I've done it 20 times in my head, a complex operation that I might. So there's not an event that I haven't encountered, and therefore there's not a stress point that I'm going to be overwhelmed by. So I commend that approach to students, where you're rehearsing, and yes, using the OSCE prep course that David Mountford runs and has been so incredibly valuable. But beyond that, use your own self-training to be able to enhance your ability to deal with the OSCEs. And can I tell you, students, that you will be asked far more difficult questions by your patients than you'll ever get asked in the OSCE.
Yeah. And I just add one other little point about that. I think rehearsal is so important, and one of the things that I did when I first went into practice is I used to ask myself, what would have to walk into the door to frighten the pants off me? And the very first one I came up with, if I had two parents turn up in the morning and their child had died of SIDS the night before, how would I manage that? And just constantly, it was part of my work going home. What would have to walk into the door to frighten the pants off me? What would have to walk into the door where I'd have to say, oh, I really don't know, what to do with a high calcium level, something like that. So you can identify areas of your knowledge that need to be improved. And I think all of us, when we're working as doctors, are forever reflecting on what we're not seeing, what could possibly come in that could be a problem to the patient. And the other thing is that all of us feel a moral responsibility to be of benefit to our patients, not just to see them as people, but to actually do good by them.
You are both just giving these amazingly wonderful examples about thinking like a doctor. And I hope those of you who are attending the webinar are taking that advice from our founder about thinking like a doctor and are using some of the examples that they're hearing from Professor Paddy and Dr. David. Speaking of preparation, I know this is something that you've both been thinking about, which is support or help for students who are going to be taking AMC 1 or AMC 2. We have someone in our Q&A, anonymous person in our Q&A is asking about, is there any support or help with studying for AMC 1 or tips or thoughts on taking AMC? So who would like to go first? Dr. David, would you like to speak about that first?
Yes, I will actually. We've recognised for a while that, we shouldn't lose contact with our students once they pass the OSCEs, because the next step is the AMC 1. As the years go on, I can see AMC 2 being dropped, to tell you the truth, and I see workplace assessment is probably taking its place. But we need to do something to help people get AMC1. American students are helped to do the USMLE1 and the USMLE2. And Australian students should also be given that option of some preparation for the AMC1. Problem is we don't know what it is yet. We're not really sure. But Professor Athol Mackay and myself have set ourselves the tasks of getting something on the ground as soon as we possibly can. So there is, once you've done your OSCE, you don't lose your email address with OUM within a couple of weeks. We still stay in touch, even as far as keeping clinical key open. But definitely there, by the time a lot of you get to your clinical years, or even towards the end of your course, OUM will be providing you help to get through the AMC1.
Thanks, Dr. David. Professor Paddy, do you have anything you'd like to add?
No, David, in fact, has been leading with Professor Athol Mackay, setting up a structure that is going to assist the students into the future, and again, to complement both of them. And it's been interesting with a bit of drive and input from previous students, and that's been wonderful to see that they've wanted to give back to the university by assisting with that. So yes, it's something we're very much looking at, and it's been overdue, but it's well and truly in train now.
Thanks, Professor Paddy. So we're nearing the end of our conversation, although I'm really enjoying myself. I know others have other commitments that they have at the top of the hour. So Professor Paddy, is there anything that we haven't covered that you feel is important for students in Australia and Aotearoa, New Zealand to know?
I think there's lots of other things that we might have knowledge handed over to the students, but I think the main message I'd like to put to the students is that I'm not part of this university to teach you how to treat. I'm here as the Dean because I want to teach students how to care. So go and learn your facts, but go and learn how to care for the patients, because you're connecting with them, connecting with their humanity, not just with their disease, and just enjoy your career.
Thanks, Professor Paddy. Dr. David, do you have any parting advice or anything you'd like students in Australia and Aotearoa, New Zealand to know?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with everything Paddy said. I think it's the whole point and soul of medicine to be in touch with and fully aware of the people that you're treating as patients. We teach and strongly push for patient-centered medicine in OUM. This caring aspect of being a doctor is so important. And I thoroughly love working for OUM simply because that's the perspective we take. And we take it over the whole 4 years as far as our students are concerned.
Thanks, Dr. David. I want to take this opportunity to acknowledge and thank Professor Paddy Dewan and Dr. David Mountford, our Dean and Associate Dean for Australia and Aotearoa, New Zealand at OUM, for taking this time to speak with all of us. So thank you so much for coming today and sharing your insights and time with everyone here. And I also want to acknowledge Anna and Daniel, Jordan and Keisha, Kirby and Kumbi, Michelle, Nordia, Nilly, Sally, Shannon, and Talia, who are here in person, and those of you who are joining us via recording. Thank you so much for joining us, and we hope to see you all again at our next webinar in the new year. And for those of you who are joining us in our 24-1 cohort, Dr. Mountford and Professor Dewan and I look forward to seeing you all at a week orientation in January. Thanks so much for joining us, everyone, at the Dean and Associate Dean. See you all again soon. Bye for now.